He closed the bedroom door softly, as if the quiet click of the latch might bruise her. That was the first thing she noticed, not the size of the room, not the fire glowing low in the marble hearth, not the heavy velvet drapes drawn tight against the winter wind. The door, it closed gently, and that was wrong, because her mother had said there would be no gentleness. Just endure, her mother had whispered that morning while fastening the final pearl into her hair. The words had carried the faint scent of rose water and starch, the familiar smell of her childhood bedroom. A wife does not flinch. A wife does not cry out. You endure. That is how houses survive. Houses survive, as if she were a brick in a wall. Now, standing in the Duke's bedchamber, Eleanor Vale felt like something far more fragile than stone. Yet she felt like the thin porcelain teacup her father once shattered during a rage, its fracture lines spidering outward even before it hit the floor. She had expected anger tonight, or hunger, or indifference. She had not expected quiet. The room was enormous. The ceilings arched like the inside of a cathedral, painted with faded constellations that glimmered faintly in the candlelight. The bed stood at the center, carved from dark walnut, its posts thick as tree trunks. The sheets were crisp, smelling faintly of lavender and cold linen. Everything was prepared. Everything was arranged. Everything suggested inevitability. And yet the Duke did not move toward her. He remained near the door, gloved hands clasped behind his back. His posture was upright, but not threatening. His face, pale from years spent more in study than in sunlight, was unreadable. She had seen him only twice before today, once in the chapel, where he signed the contract without looking at her, once at the wedding feast, where he barely spoke and did not touch the wine. Men had whispered about him. Servants had lowered their voices when his name was mentioned. Some called him cold. Others called him ruthless. One drunken cousin had said the Duke of Raventon did not possess a heart, only a ledger. Eleanor had prepared herself for a ledger. She had not prepared for silence. "You may sit," he said at last. His voice was steady, low, almost tired. Not commanding, not cruel, just tired. She remained standing, because endurance meant obedience, and obedience meant standing where one was placed. He studied her then, saw not in the way men at the feast had done, with greedy curiosity, but as if he were trying to solve something. His dark eyes lingered on the tightness in her shoulders, the rigid way she held her breath. "You believe I will hurt you," he said. It was not a question. Her heart slammed so loudly she was certain he could hear it. She did not answer. He removed his gloves slowly, placing them on a small mahogany desk near the hearth. The leather made a soft thud against the wood. He flexed his fingers once, as if testing their warmth. "I will not," he said. 3 simple words. Her body did not know what to do with them. Because her mother had not prepared her for refusal. She had been prepared for pain. She had rehearsed silence. She had even practiced holding back tears in front of her bedroom mirror, or watching her own reflection until her eyes burned. But she had not prepared for a man who stepped away from the bed. The Duke walked toward the fire instead. He stirred the embers with an iron poker, sending a brief cascade of sparks upward. The room brightened for a moment, shadows retreating from the walls like startled animals. "You are 18, he said quietly. "Yes, Your Grace." "And you believe tonight is a sentence." Her throat tightened. She swallowed. "Yes." The word felt like treason. He did not react with anger. Instead, he nodded once, almost to himself. "My mother told me something similar on my wedding night," he said. Eleanor blinked. Wedding night. Her gaze snapped toward him. I was 19, he continued, eyes fixed on the fire. She told me a husband must prove himself immediately, and that hesitation is weakness, that a wife must be claimed before dawn. Claimed. The word landed heavily in the space between them. My first wife, he said, and now there was something in his voice she had not heard before. Died before spring. The fire cracked. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows. Eleanor felt the room shift. She had heard rumors of a first duchess. No one spoke of her name. Only that she had been delicate, that she had not lasted. You think I killed her, he said. It was not accusation. It was fact. She had thought it. Of course she had. He turned then, and for the first time she saw something raw beneath the composure. Not rage, not pride. Regret. She was afraid, he said, and I believed fear was normal. I believed it was my right. The confession hung in the air, a heavy and fragile at once. I was wrong. The words did not sound rehearsed. They sounded scraped from somewhere deep. Eleanor's fingers trembled. She clasped them tightly in front of her to hide it. He stepped away from the fire, but not toward the bed. Instead, he stopped several feet from her, maintaining distance like a man approaching a wounded animal. You will not be touched tonight, he said. Her breath caught painfully in her chest. You may sleep in the adjoining chamber if you wish. The door between remains unlocked. If you require anything, ring the bell. This was not how it was supposed to happen. Her mother had spoken of endurance as if it were armor. But what use was armor when no blow came? Confusion replaced fear. And beneath confusion, something more dangerous began to stir. Hope. What she crushed it immediately. Hope was reckless. Hope was how girls got hurt. Why? She asked before she could stop herself. The word sounded small in the vast room. He did not seem offended by her boldness. Because I will not repeat a mistake, he said. That is all? A flicker of something almost like sadness crossed his face. That is more than enough. Silence settled again, but it was different now. Not tense, not waiting. Open. Eleanor's eyes wandered across the room, noticing details she had missed before. The shelves near the far wall were lined with books, their spines cracked from use. A faint scent of old parchment drifted through the air, mixing with the lavender of the sheets and the smoky warmth of the hearth. On the desk lay an unfinished letter, the ink still slightly glossy, as if written moments ago. But this was not the chamber of a monster. It was the room of a man who read at night, a man who wrote letters he did not finish. You may remove your veil, he said gently. Her hands moved automatically, lifting the delicate lace from her hair. The pins loosened, and several dark strands fell around her shoulders. The weight on her scalp eased. He looked away while she did it. That small courtesy undid her more than any cruelty might have. Tears burned unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. Endure. Her mother's voice echoed again. But endurance was meant for pain. What was she meant to do with mercy? He crossed the room slowly, stopping at a narrow side table. From it, he picked up a small silver key. This opens the library, he said, extending it toward her. It is yours as much as mine. She stared at the key as if it were something alive. You are giving me access? She asked. You are my wife, he replied simply, not my prisoner. The key felt cool against her palm when she took it. Solid, real. In that moment, something inside her shifted. Not trust, not yet, but the rigid wall of dread she had built began to crack. He moved toward the door that led to the adjoining chamber and opened it. The smaller room beyond glowed with softer candlelight. A narrow bed stood prepared, its quilt neatly folded back. "You are safe here," he said. Safe. The word was foreign. No one had promised her safety since childhood. She stepped toward the doorway slowly, as if the floor might give way beneath her. At the threshold, she paused. "Your Grace," she said, her voice unsteady. "What happens tomorrow?" He met her gaze. "Tomorrow," he said, "we begin again. Not as strangers bound by fear, not as executioner and sacrifice, just two people standing in the quiet after expectation had been denied." Eleanor entered the adjoining room, the silver key clenched tightly in her hand. Behind her, the Duke remained by the dying fire. Alone, and for the first time that night, she wondered which of them had truly been enduring all along. The next morning, Eleanor woke before the sun. For a few seconds, she did not remember where she was. The quilt beneath her fingers felt heavier than the thin blankets from her mother's house. The air smelled faintly of cedarwood and cooled ash. Somewhere beyond the wall, a clock ticked with steady precision. Then memory returned. The wedding, the door closing softly, the words, "You are safe here." Her chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with something more unsettling. Uncertainty. She sat up slowly. The adjoining door stood slightly ajar, just as he had promised. No lock, no guard, no test. She rose and crossed the small room, her bare feet brushing against the thick woven rug. The fibers were coarse but warm. When she reached the doorway, she hesitated only briefly before stepping into the Duke's chamber. The bed had not been slept in. The sheets remained untouched, perfectly smooth, and the fire had burned down to pale gray embers, and he was gone. For reasons she did not understand, that unsettled her more than if he had been there. On the desk lay the same unfinished letter she had noticed the night before. Morning light spilled across it, revealing sharp, deliberate handwriting. The ink had dried unevenly, as if the writer had paused too long between sentences. She did not mean to read it, but her eyes moved before her conscience did. "I failed her because I believed duty excused cruelty." The line stopped there. No name, no signature, just a confession cut in half. Eleanor stepped back, as if the words had heat. She heard footsteps in the corridor beyond the main door, followed by quiet voices. Servants. The house was waking. Her stomach twisted. Today the world would expect proof. Blood on linen. Whispers of consummation. Confirmation that the Duke had claimed what he purchased. She gripped the silver key still resting in her palm. Not my prisoner. A knock sounded at the outer door. "Your Grace?" a woman's voice called gently. "May I enter?" Eleanor turned toward the sound just as the Duke himself stepped into the chamber from a side door near the bookcases. He wore a simple dark coat now, his hair still slightly damp, as if he had washed in haste. He paused when he saw her standing by the desk. Their eyes met. For a brief second, something flickered across his face. Alarm. Not because she was there, but because she had seen the letter. "I did not know you were awake," he said calmly. "I could not sleep long," she replied. Another knock. "Your Grace?" the voice repeated. A little more firmly. Yet he glanced toward the door, then back at Eleanor. Something unspoken passed between them. A shared awareness. Expectation was waiting outside. He walked to the door and opened it just enough for the housekeeper to enter. Mrs. Halloway was a sharp-featured woman in her late 50s, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun. She carried fresh linens folded neatly over her arm. Her eyes moved quickly around the room, the untouched bed, the separate chamber beyond, Eleanor standing fully dressed. It took less than a second for understanding to register, and disapproval. "The linens, Your Grace," Mrs. Halloway said carefully. "They will not be needed," the Duke replied. The silence that followed was heavy. Mrs. Halloway's gaze flicked briefly toward Eleanor, then back to him. "Shall I inform the steward that the marriage has been completed?" she asked. Eleanor's pulse pounded in her ears. The Duke did not hesitate. "You shall inform the steward," he said evenly, "that the Duchess requires no disturbance this morning." Mrs. Halloway stiffened slightly. "Yes, Your Grace." She left without another word, though the disapproval in her posture lingered like smoke. When the door closed, Eleanor released a breath she had not realized she was holding. "They will talk," she said quietly. "Yes. They will assume. Yes." A strange steadiness settled in her chest. "And you do not care?" He looked at her fully now. "I care about many things," he said. "Gossip is not among them." He crossed the room and stopped near the window. Frost edged the glass, tracing delicate patterns that caught the early light. My first marriage was not arranged by choice," he said suddenly. Eleanor said nothing. "It was negotiated," he continued. "Assets for assets. Titles for influence. She was younger than you." His jaw tightened slightly. "I was told hesitation would weaken my standing, that affection could grow after obligation." He turned his gaze toward the pale winter sky. "Affection does not grow in soil watered with fear." The words settled deep. Eleanor thought of her mother's tight hands fastening pearls, of the way she had avoided meeting her daughter's eyes. Just endure. "Did she ask you to stop?" Eleanor asked softly. The question hung in the air, fragile and dangerous. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the desk and picked up the unfinished letter. His thumb brushed lightly over the line she had read. "She did not know she could," he said at last. Regret lived in those words. Not loud, not dramatic, just present. Eleanor felt something shift inside her again, but this time it was heavier. The beginnings of understanding. "You believe sparing me will undo what happened to her," she said. "No," he replied quietly. "Nothing undoes it." The honesty in that sentence felt more intimate than touch. He set the letter down carefully. "But I can choose not to repeat it." Silence filled the space between them again, but now it carried weight. Shared weight. Outside, the estate stirred to life. Hooves struck frozen ground. A distant gate creaked open. Somewhere down the corridor, a servant laughed too loudly, quickly shushed. Life continued. Expectation continued. Eleanor walked slowly toward the window, stopping beside him, but not too close. She could feel the warmth of his presence without contact. "What do you expect of me?" she asked. He considered that. "Intelligence," he said finally. "Honesty. And patience, if you are willing." She almost laughed. Patience, she understood. She had been patient her entire life. "With time," he added, "I hope for partnership." The word startled her. Not obedience, not submission. Partnership. "You would allow that?" she asked. "I would require it." For the first time since entering this house, Eleanor felt something steadier than fear or confusion. Respect. It did not erase the grief she carried from her mother's warning. It did not erase the image of a first duchess whose name no one spoke, but it created space. Space where something different might grow. And a sharp knock echoed again at the outer door, firmer this time. The Duke's expression hardened slightly. "That will be my uncle," he said. "Is that a problem?" "Yes." He moved toward the door, but before opening it, he turned back to her. "They will test you," he said quietly. "They will look for weakness." "I have been trained to endure," she replied. His eyes held hers. "I would prefer you learn to resist." The knock came again, impatient now. The Duke opened the door fully. Standing there was a tall man with a narrow face and calculating eyes. His coat was immaculate, his smile thin. "Ah," the uncle said smoothly. "I trust the night was satisfactory." Eleanor felt the old instinct rise. Lower your gaze, stay silent, be small. But she remembered the silver key in her hand. She remembered the unfinished sentence on the letter, and for the first time in her life, endurance did not feel like survival. It felt like surrender. She lifted her chin. The Duke stepped slightly aside, not shielding her, not controlling her. Allowing. The uncle's eyes flicked toward her expectantly. "Well, Duchess," he pressed. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "It was peaceful," she said. The word struck the room like a stone dropped in still water. Peaceful, not passionate, not painful, not triumphant. Just peaceful. The uncle's smile faltered. The Duke did not speak. But something unspoken passed between husband and wife in that moment. Not love. Not yet. But alignment. And in the corridor, heavy with judgment and old rules, regret began to transform into something far more dangerous. Choice. The uncle did not like the word peaceful. It showed in the way his fingers tightened around the silver head of his cane. It showed in the thin line of his mouth, in the faint narrowing of his eyes, as he studied Eleanor like a chess piece that had moved without permission. Peaceful, he repeated slowly, as if tasting it for flaws. How fortunate. The Duke's posture did not change, but something subtle shifted in the air. A quiet line drawn. "My wife requires rest," he said evenly. "If there is estate business, it can wait." Estate business never waited. Everyone in Raventon knew that. The lands, the tenants, the ledgers, the contracts with London merchants. These were the true heart of the dukedom. And the uncle, Lord Bertram Ashcombe, had managed much of it during the Duke's years of withdrawal after his first wife's death, which meant he had grown comfortable. Too comfortable. "I only wish to ensure stability," the uncle replied smoothly. "The board in London grows impatient when succession appears uncertain." Succession. The word landed like a stone in Eleanor's stomach. This was never about betting. It was about heirs, control, continuity. The Duke's jaw tightened slightly. "My marriage is not a quarterly report." The uncle's eyes flicked between them again, measuring, calculating. "Of course not," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Still, the house has suffered. Fragility before." The implication was clear. The first Duchess. The one whose name was spoken only in whispers. Eleanor felt the old instinct rise again. Be small. Be agreeable. Be silent. That instinct had been carved into her by years of watching her father's temper and her mother's compliance. Survival meant invisibility, but something inside her no longer wished to disappear. "I understand the importance of stability," Eleanor said calmly, stepping forward so she stood beside her husband rather than behind him. "And I understand patience." The uncle's brows lifted slightly. "Patience," he echoed. "Yes," she said. "Strong foundations are not rushed." The Duke did not look at her, but she sensed his attention sharpen. Lord Ashcombe studied her longer now, and as if reassessing the asset he believed had been delivered into this house. His gaze lingered not with desire, but with appraisal. You speak confidently for someone new to Raventon, he said. I was raised to observe before speaking, she replied. Last night I observed peace. That seems a strong beginning. Silence stretched. Then, finally, the uncle inclined his head a fraction. Not approval, not surrender, but acknowledgement. Very well, he said. I will leave you to your foundation. When he turned and walked down the corridor, the faint echo of his cane striking stone lingered long after he disappeared. The Duke closed the door. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he exhaled slowly. You surprised him, he said. I surprised myself, she admitted. He looked at her then, truly looked, and something in his expression had changed. Not guarded, not distant, curious. You did not lower your gaze, he observed. No. Why? She considered that honestly, because I am tired of being told to endure things I do not understand. The confession felt both reckless and freeing. He studied her face carefully, as if committing it to memory. My mother told me to dominate, he said quietly. She said a duke who hesitates invites ruin. And do you believe that? Eleanor asked. He shook his head once. I believe fear invites ruin. The words settled between them with quiet certainty. Outside, sunlight began to melt the frost along the window panes. The white edges softened, water tracing thin lines downward like tears reversing their course. Eleanor moved toward the desk again, drawn to the unfinished letter. But she did not touch it this time. She simply looked. Will you finish it? She asked. He followed her gaze. I have tried, he said. Several times. To whom is it written? To myself, he replied. That answer caught her off guard. He walked closer, stopping beside her, close enough that she could see the faint shadows beneath his eyes, close enough to notice the tiny scar near his temple, pale against his skin. I began writing it after her funeral, he said. I wanted to record the truth before it was reshaped by gossip. What truth? That I mistook authority for strength, he said, and obedience for love. The room felt smaller suddenly, not confining, but intimate. And what have you learned since? She asked. He looked at her, not with dominance, not with guilt alone. With something steadier. Gigi, that restraint is strength, he said. And that love, if it comes, must be invited, not extracted. The words stirred something fragile in her chest. Hope. She was almost afraid to name it, because hope required vulnerability, and vulnerability had always been dangerous. May I ask something difficult? She said softly. Yes. If one day I choose not to be afraid of you, what would you do with that? The question lingered in the quiet morning light. He did not answer quickly. I would protect it, he said finally, not claim it. There was no flourish in his voice, no dramatic vow, just steady sincerity. And for the first time since the wedding contract was signed, Eleanor felt something other than dread when she looked at him. She felt possibility. A knock sounded again, lighter this time. A young maid entered with breakfast laid carefully on a silver tray. Fresh bread, soft butter, 2 boiled eggs, and tea steaming faintly with the scent of bergamot. The maid's eyes darted discreetly between them, searching for signs. Signs of struggle, of shame, of triumph. She found none. Only quiet. The maid placed the tray on a small round table near the window and curtsied before leaving. Eleanor approached the table. The Duke followed but did not sit until she did. A small gesture, but deliberate. They ate in silence at first, not uncomfortable silence, thoughtful silence. Outside, the estate grounds stretched wide, and winter bare. Beyond the frosted lawns stood rows of tenant cottages. Smoke rose from their chimneys in thin gray spirals, lives depending on decisions made within these walls. Eleanor studied the land. Your tenants," she said slowly. "How are they managed?" He looked mildly surprised by the question. "Efficiently," he replied. "Why?" "Efficiency is not always kindness." He held her gaze. "No," he agreed. "It is not." She tore a small piece of bread, her fingers brushing against crumbs. "My father valued efficiency," she said quietly. "He called it discipline. My mother called it survival." "And you?" he asked. She looked out at the cottages again. "I call it fear disguised as order," and the honesty in her own voice startled her. He did not dismiss it. Instead, he leaned back slightly, studying her with renewed interest. "You wish to involve yourself in estate matters?" he asked. "I wish to understand the house I have entered," she said. "If I am to build a foundation." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his mouth. "Then we begin today," he said. "Not tomorrow, not someday. Today." Hope did not arrive like fireworks. It arrived like this. 2 chairs pulled closer to a window, 2 cups of tea growing cold, while maps were unrolled across a small round table. 2 people choosing conversation over control. Later that afternoon, as they walked the estate grounds side by side, servants watched from a distance, not scandalized, not triumphant. Curious. The Duke did not touch her. He did not need to. But because the space between them was no longer filled with dread, it was filled with something far more powerful. Choice. And as Eleanor Vale stepped onto the frost-softened grass, the silver key warm in her pocket, she realized her mother had been wrong about one thing. Endurance might keep a house standing, but hope could change it. She glanced at the man walking beside her, no longer executioner, no longer stranger. Just a man who had once mistaken authority for strength and now chose restraint instead. Their wedding night had not been marked by conquest. It had been marked by refusal. And in that refusal, something entirely new had begun. Not obligation, not fear, but the quiet, radical possibility of partnership.